Okay. Hello, everybody eating lunch. Welcome back to the next panel. I know you're digesting, but luckily we have a super exciting panel. So if you're feeling tired, just focus in on the conversation, stand up, jump around, do what you need to do. But we aim to keep you entertained. My name is Laura Clivens, and I'm a climate reporter at KQED in San Francisco. Thank you so much, Ivan, and your panel for your discussion on reliability. In this panel, we'll explore the topic of energy affordability, which has been a thread throughout this whole day, meaning costs of electricity, natural gas, and the price at the pump. And we'll be discussing the question of California having some of the highest energy costs in the nation. How can we affordably achieve our clean energy targets? Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. Under the California Public Utilities Commission's rules, discussion of open proceedings is banned, and any discussion of open rate making or catastrophic wildfire proceedings will be subject to CPUC reporting requirements. That said, I am joined by an expert panel. They are truly remarkable, and I'm humbled to be here with them. I will give brief introductions, which I have really shortened, but please go to the website, PPIC, to read all of the incredible accomplishments of these individuals here. First, I'd like to introduce Sivagunda. He is the vice chair and public member of the California Energy Commission, where he oversees state energy planning and analysis, among other things. Before that, he served in a variety of capacities at the Energy Efficiency Institute at the University of California, Davis. We also are joined by Alice Reynolds, president of the California Public Utilities Commission. Prior to her appointment, she served as an energy advisor to both governors, Gavin Newsom and Jerry Brown. Nora Sheriff is an attorney representing the California Large Energy Consumers Association, CLECA. CLECA members produce steel, cement, and oxygen for hospitals, among other industries, with an outsized demand for power, making the price of electricity crucial to their competitiveness. Adria Tinen is the Director of Race, Equity, and Legislative Policy for the Utility Reform Network, TURN. She works to ensure that all people have access to quality, reliable, affordable energy, phone, and internet services, regardless of race, class, income, or geography. Thanks to each of you for joining us. So, the amount people pay for electricity in California has gone up faster than the rate of inflation. That's according to the Legislative Analyst's Office, and it's also no surprise for anybody who lives here in California. So, we're going to start off with this big question. Broadly, what are the key drivers behind rising electricity costs in California? Alice, let's start with you since you head the agency that sets electricity rates.
Sure, and thank you. Thanks for having me. It's really great to be here. Glad to see so many people here to talk about energy issues. It's something that I care about a lot and love having policy discussions like this. The energy system, of course, and energy bills are made up of a variety of charges and costs and things like support for low-income customers, but also the costs of the system and the cost of generation of the supply of electricity that goes to customers. The Public Utilities Commission regularly studies the drivers of costs and looks at what goes into bills. We, of course, approve costs through our general rate cases for each of the large electrical utilities. We also approve contracts for generation for the utilities that we regulate, and then we do planning to move the system forward in the least cost way. What we've seen recently is that the primary driver of the increases in electricity bills is frankly climate change, and having to adjust the system to both make the infrastructure safer to prevent ignitions of wildfires, as well as respond to the impacts of climate change. And that's both through repairs after wildfires, dealing with extreme heat, and that stresses on the system, and then also moving forward with the supply that we need to meet demand that is both higher but also more volatile, so meaning can vary to a great extent, more than we've seen in the past. We're getting needle peaks that are really hard to plan for when you have a system of supply that is increasingly based on renewables. where it's harder to kind of ramp up and ramp down according to the conditions, and you have essentially zero cost, marginal cost resources that can run all the time, but are harder to ramp up and down. The other impact, I think, you've probably all heard of this issue, is the question of compensation for behind the meter resources and solar systems in particular, and just how to get that compensation right so that it is spreading out costs through all customers and not putting burdens on a smaller group of customers.
Thank you. Siva, we are mid-transition. What does that mean, and how does it impact electricity rates?
Yeah, thank you, or thanks for having us here, and thanks to everybody for taking the time to be here, and it's always lovely to see a lot of colleagues and friends that we work with every day. So I think to just kind of back up a little bit and kind of frame the overarching piece here, what we have done in California in terms of making sure we address the air quality issues, starting with smog, that we had in California in the 70s, kind of all the work that we've done to reduce emissions. And then, we moved into the paradigm of, climate change and tried to kind of bring that down as well, the GHG emissions. And now we're looking more and more into how do we make sure the local impacts are also addressed. So as we've done this, it took a lot of effort, and we are seeing the results on the grid. So on a variety of ways. One, on the electricity side, a large part of our transition is predicated on electrifying large swaths of the economy, underpinned with a clean and reliable system, and also affordable. On the petroleum side, you have the peak for petroleum demand, gasoline demand in California. We had that in 2008, just before the financial crisis, and then you had a little bit of a lull, start going up again, but the most recent peak was in 2017. And we have been seeing about 1% to 2% decline regularly. And similarly, in natural gas, most of our forecasts currently suggest that the natural gas demand is also going to go down. So the idea of mid-transition, and I want to make sure that I give credit to Dr. Emily Grubert from Notre Dame, who coined that phrase around the scholarly work, is really around, as we move into the phase of where you see the decline of the legacy system. So the legacy system is declining, but not declining fast enough. But the new system that we want is continuing to scale up, but hasn't fully scaled up to be able to say we can rely on that 100%. As that happens, you have two separate issues that we need to contend with. One, anytime you're scaling an emerging technology, it necessitates the idea of some level of public funding to scale that. And typically that's R&D, D&D, the work that we do. So in transportation, it's how do we make sure EVs grow. In work on electricity system, it's about how do you grow the new technologies, solar, wind, others that are coming on board. So as you think about that, you need to continue to invest in that. But at the same time, to the earlier panel, somebody like Andy from Chevron, that system also requires a lot of investment. You cannot say that investment is not needed. One of the critical parts of this whole conversation is to think about this as an ecosystem. And whether we talk about petroleum system, electricity system, or so on, you're talking about a point A to point B before the consumer actually touches that. In petroleum, you're talking about drilling all the way, upstream, coming through refineries to the pump. And one of the things that is not apparent to us in every single conversation is every single point along the way has a point of failure. The pipes that connect the wells to the refinery are owned by somebody who needs to make a financial decision on investing in those pipes or not. So, you need to create that kind of confidence for those in the midstream to allow for that investments. Similarly, on the electricity side, the issue that we need to contend with is a point that President Reynolds just mentioned. As we increase the demand, let's also observe that the demand, while increasing, has a higher impact on when the demand happens during the day, right? And 87, 60 hours of the year. And also, how does the demand distribute over winter and summer? So what is necessary there is, how do you ensure you're not only just meeting the median of the day, but these long tails that are happening because of climate change, right? So you can have, a 40,000 megawatt peak today, but just for one day a year, it could be 55. And that necessitates us to invest in that additional capacity, and somebody has to pay for it. So those are the pieces that we need to work through.
And so how does us being in the middle of this transition, how does that then affect what people are paying?
It's just as we're investing in two systems. So it's you have to kind of think about that as when you are paying for two different systems, the cost is going to be higher. That is a fact of transition.
Nora, what are some other factors that go into our high electricity costs from where you sit? What do you see?
Well, I think President Reynolds touched on the net energy metering subsidy that's in rates, and that's a big driver.
Which is about solar and how we pay rooftop solar.
The rooftop
how we pay that
solar,
back. Yep.
behind the meter solar, and the compensation that they're getting that is subsidized by all the ratepayers who don't have rooftop solar. And that includes all customer classes, not just the residential customers, but also the industrial customers that I represent. And then the wildfire costs, not just the liabilities and the damages from the wildfires, but also the grid hardening costs and the insurance costs. That's another big driver. But on the transition of the system, we're seeing a big need for things like transmission and more generation capacity, and that is having a bigger and bigger impact as time goes by. And if just looking at industrial customers, the average rate in California last month, July, average industrial rate in California, 20 cents a kilowatt hour. Just across the border in Oregon, 8 cents a kilowatt hour. Washington, 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, 6.60, yeah. And then in Nevada, about 6 cents a kilowatt hour. In Arizona, about 8 cents a kilowatt hour. So there is a significant difference between the average rate that industry pays here in California versus the rates that the neighboring states pay versus the rates that you could see in China or in Korea. And for the CLICA member companies, I know I'm getting a little bit far afield from your question, but for the CLICA member companies who are in global markets for cement, for steel, for industrial gas, medical gas, where they produce their product is something that they look at, and they have to make a decision, do we want to make it here? Do we want to make it there? And that is where we get into economic leakage and emissions leakage, because producing the emissions-intensive products, energy-intensive products here in California, where we have cleaner power and you're closer to where the product is going to be used, so you don't have that transportation emissions associated with it, is better for our global climate change policies. So to get back to the drivers of the rate increases, I think one thing that we want to keep in mind as we're looking at what's driving these costs is what can drive the costs down going forward. And I think one of the things that can drive the costs down going forward is getting into a regional grid, regional organization.
And let's talk about that more in a little bit. Adria, what are some of the other cost drivers that we're not talking about?
Yeah, I think Nora really got to a great point about the need to build out transmission, and you were talking about our transition to electrification. I think first and foremost, affordability is our biggest obstacle to meeting climate goals. It is a massive deterrent for individuals, for residents to electrify their homes. And I think the big thing that we have to think about, we know that in order to meet our climate goals, we need to increase electrification, which means we need to build out transmission and continue to build out the grid. And that is really expensive because that's all put into rate base. And rate base is the biggest thing that drives rate increases and the lack of affordability. And the biggest thing we need to focus on shrinking. There are a lot of ways that we can do that, and I think and we can talk about those throughout the conversation today, but I think finding alternative means of financing is absolutely critical to shrinking the rate base, so that when we are building transmission, we are paying, for example, a 5% rate rather than a 14% interest rate on that. The savings from public financing, for instance, compared to private shareholder financing, can give us $3 billion a year in savings, according to a recent net zero report. It's over 50% savings compared to private shareholders. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to address the affordability crisis. I think in addition to that, we've got wildfire mitigation costs. That's a huge driver of rates, and we need to prioritize cost-effective approaches to that, where we can, for half the money, achieve the same level of safety. That needs to be prioritized.
So give us an example of what that means.
Thank you. So as opposed to undergrounding, which takes years and years and billions of dollars to do, the rate that we
Putting
need.
wires underground.
Putting wires underground.
Areas.
We can insulate covered conductors. We can use fast trip technology, which have been proven in studies from Stanford and elsewhere to provide the same level of safety for half the cost and significantly faster implementation. It takes forever to underground, especially in urban areas where you have to tear up streets and close access to neighborhoods. You don't have to do that with these other forms, more cost-effective approaches to wildfire mitigation. And the last thing that I would add is we've reached a point now where only about half of our rates are determined through general rate cases. And a lot of the rate increases, PG&E increased their rates 6 times last year. And a lot of that comes through memorandum accounts and additional proceedings that I will not talk about.
Right.
Because of ex parte.
Through other, it goes
through
different routes,
through
right?
other mechanisms.
And why is that significant that it goes through a different way?
Yeah, I think it makes it even more difficult to track and maintain and keep our eye on affordability and how much and how fast are we increasing rates. And so, TURN is working on a number of things right now related to affordability and to transparency on those issues, which we can get into.
Okay, great. I want to just follow up with you really quick, just to lay out the stakes here, because Adria, you represent people who are really struggling to pay their bills. What sacrifices are people actually making? What are you hearing from constituents? What is how are they affording energy in a state like California where it's so expensive?
Yeah, thank you. TURN has a fantastic organizing team. We do incredible work in the community, and there's a couple things that come to mind. One, we run a hotline for customers who are having trouble sorting out their bills. So we hear directly from people on a regular basis about the challenges to being able to pay their bill each month. We have a group called Ratepayers United, which is community leaders that we sort of empower and train to be able to speak for themselves to legislators and to the commission and elsewhere. And what we've learned from those is we've got leaders in our Ratepayers United who rely on food banks to feed their families because they can't afford to buy groceries and pay their electricity bill in the same month. Okay. That is not a choice that anybody in California should be making.
Thank you. Okay, I want to talk a bit more about some of the solutions that this panel sees in our future. Alice, let's start with you. A new transmission line, it might take 10 years to get approval in California. How could streamlining this process help bring down costs, and what could this look like?
Yeah, good question. So I want to pick up on something that Siva said earlier about the ecosystem approach, because I think it's a really good way to kind of frame the discussion that we really do have to think about the electrical system as ecosystem. And ratepayers pay every penny that goes into it. There's no other source of funding. And so anything you do that has to do with electricity costs money and goes into the bill. And we also have an existing infrastructure system, 4th largest economy in the world. In California, there is a lot of existing infrastructure out there. There's a lot of clean energy online. A lot of the retail providers, including the utilities, are largely providing clean energy now, especially in Northern California. But we know we're going to have more load and more variable load, and we know that we still have work to do to reduce our reliance on gas and really meet our climate change goals. The electricity sector has done a lot, but there's more to do. And so what we need to do is look at the system as a whole and figure out what are the things that we need to change, what are the investments we need to make that are the least cost that will meet our needs. So define the needs. Is this a reliability issue? Is this a clean energy target issue? And then what is the solution that meets that in the least cost way? Sometimes it's transmission, sometimes it's transmission upgrades, sometimes it's grid enhancing technologies, sometimes it's a substation upgrade, sometimes it's some kind of demand response that we can work in. All of these have costs, but we look at what's the best way to do this. Some solutions add costs to the distribution system, which are hard to attribute to certain changes, but we've started to try to look at that more and more. So if you're doing something that then pushes the utilities to have to make upgrades to the distribution system, that's also adding costs. So in transmission, though, we do have a system in California, and I think it's really unique to the country, where we start early on planning, and the CEC plays a huge part in this in the demand forecast. So every year, looking at what is our projected demand, they do it in a public process where they really look through what drivers are, what's happening with demand on the system, how do we project out into the future. That's getting harder and harder, and Siva can speak to that more than me, but what we do is then at the PUC take that and put that into our planning documents. We use it for planning for new generation that needs to be added so that we make sure that the best resource values are placed near the system where we need it. So where can we put the solar resources that close to the areas of the grid that can accommodate it to the best extent that we can. But then sometimes there's new transmission upgrades, new lines that are needed. These lines will deliver power throughout the West. As Nora was saying, we're connected here in California. We're part of a larger West-wide grid. And so that's a benefit to us. If we can trade power throughout the West, we can help share some of the costs of the upgrades in the grid. But through that process, what we do is look at, okay, what are our needs 5, 10, 15 even years in advance? We've done 20-year planning recently. And what do we need to do now to be ready? And we don't want to do it too soon because that's a cost on the ratepayers, but we don't want to start too late. So getting that kind of Goldilocks transmission planning process right is something we've really been working at. Then when the projects are identified, so those least cost best fit projects through a competitive process, for in-state projects, they come to the PUC and we do CEQA and we work on the permitting, make sure that the impacts are mitigated. And so we have traditionally done a process where we have at times reevaluated the need for the project after our CAISO, our independent system operator, has already said, this is what we need for the system. We have traditionally done that again. So we've recently eliminated that pursuant to legislative direction and a streamlining process. So we don't redo that, we just move forward with the permitting, which can reduce costs. And so investors have more certainty, you can get a lower cost of capital. This is a competitive process, so it's not just the investor-owned utilities, there are private developers too. So if they have the best bid to come forward with the best financing, then their project would move forward. And then we're also looking at ways that we're doing pilots to examine where in the process are we causing the slowdowns when we're doing permitting. And then the same with build. How can we make sure that the projects that we're counting on get built? And we have a lot of interagency coordination on all of those various pieces.
Okay. Siva, we've heard now you and Alice both say we're anticipating greater load. Give us just a general sense of where we are. Where have we been in the last 10 years in terms of our demand for electricity, and where are we going, and what is driving that? What in California, I think we hear a lot about data centers. Also, maybe tell us where those stand in California.
Yeah, absolutely. So just looking at the last 10 years, just the decade, we have been pretty flat in our demand.
Which I think is sometimes surprising.
It's
for
very
people,
surprising.
Right?
So
because we've seen so many more EVs.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the piece that we need to kind of make sure that we think through is what metric are we using to understand the growth of demand, right? If you're looking at just energy that's used in a year, given how much behind the meter PV that we've gotten over the system, that cuts out the amount of energy we're using.
Solar, you mean, by PV?
Behind the meter PV, solar. So overall, the energy that we are using has been pretty flat, but that's not going to stay that way later part of this decade, and especially going into the next decade. We are going to have rapid increases in that, primarily because of electrification of buildings and transportation, and also the growth in new pieces such as data centers. At this moment, we do not know exactly the type of load that we'll get from green hydrogen, especially electrolytic green hydrogen. So we don't bake that into the forecast, but the big drivers today are electrification of end users and data centers. So then that's kind of the energy issue. But then once you go down a layer and say, okay, that energy is going to go up, at what point of the day is it going to go up, right? That becomes a more important question, because that actually drives the system that you need to build. So if you're looking at the California system as a whole, we are about 110 gigawatts today. Not all of that is available every hour of the day, right? So we continue to use 40% of that, roughly 40 gigs of thermal resources for shorter and shorter and shorter periods of time. So if you're using it for shorter and shorter periods of time, you still need that. So you're holding on to this insurance policy for a few hours, but that passes through to the consumers. And finally, the third level is we historically think about our load as significantly a summer peaking load. But moving forward,
Because of air conditioning?
Because of air conditioning. But as we move towards heating the houses with electricity and the water, heating with electricity, we are beginning to see in the forecast that our summer peak and winter peak will essentially be the same in the next 20 years. And again, that poses a big question on solar is not the same output in winter. So you have to begin to layer these pieces, and as you layer those pieces, the system becomes very complex. And just want to tee off like one piece that President Reynolds was kind of talking about. One of the ways of thinking about solutions as we move forward is just maximizing the utility of the system that we already have. So on the load side, you have the distribution system, and what can you do to what we call as load factor? The idea that you're using the system that's built at the distribution level maximally. So the loads are coming in a way that you don't have to build the distribution system to accommodate just 50 hours of the year. So can you shape that load in a way that the load factor is maximum? Similarly, on the supply side, you have what is called a capacity factor, meaning how can you maximize the utility of the resources and not let them curtailed? For example, more storage on the system would reduce the curtailment of solar. And to Nora's point earlier, having the ability to regionalize the market allows for us to send that energy that we don't use and bring the energy from other renewables across the West into California when they're producing.
All right. Thank you. Siva, another question for you. So two of California's oil refineries are projected to close in the next few years. And if that happens, we'll see a wider gap in demand and supply. High schoolers, stay with me. Eyes up here. Good job. Okay. You and others at the CEC have put together recommendations for Governor Newsom for how to deal with the high prices at the pump. Broad strokes, what are those? And how can we use those lessons to think about larger transitions like electricity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this kind of goes back to that mid-transition phase, right? The mid-transition of the system, especially as you think about petroleum, and I think we should continue to talk about that in natural gas as well, because that's a declining system. And you'll have to continue to put investment into retaining large swaths of that system as we go down. So for petroleum, I think fundamentally it comes down to three pieces. So one, why are refineries leaving? It comes down to two pieces. So one, just the amount of money they make, right? So contrary to the general notion, when we look at the overarching value system of where money is made, refineries are one part of the entire value chain, and refineries are usually not the ones that make the most money. It's actually downstream from the refinery. It's about marketing. How do you market the supply from a refinery into the gas station? So the first thing to think about is, overarching, which parts of the refineries are actually more vulnerable, that are basically those that are not vertically integrated into the system. So those wholesale refineries who are just producing refining product and puts it in the wholesale market are most exposed to that profit issue. Second, the risk of operating in California as they perceive it, as our goals tighten and tighten in terms of overarching climate policy, health policy, and such. Between those two things, the refineries have choice to make, which is where do I put my capital to get the maximum amount of ROI? If the ROI coming from California is less than ROI in the Gulf Coast, I would move my money there.
Right, we heard that earlier on the panel, right?
And I think I think that's true, right? I mean, I think it's pretty well validated. So as we move forward with that, now the question is, how do we stabilize that investment confidence? And to earlier question from you on transmission, and it applies to all energy infrastructure, you can reduce the overall investment cost by creating certainty. I think it's an important element, but at the same time, when you create certainty, to President Reynolds' point, you still have to have adaptive management, that you're not overshooting infrastructure build. So how do you create investor confidence without compromising the need to be able to adaptively manage the system? Mm-hmm. So the solutions then are, let us make sure how to stabilize the market as a whole. I think we think crude oil from California has to be increased or stabilized. Right now, that has been precipitously dropping. Over the last 40 years, the overall crude oil consumption by California has gone down by about 28%. But during that time, we lost about 68% of California production.
That's a lot. Big gap.
That's a big gap. So kind of stabilizing that. Stabilizing all the state agency regulations and local agency regulations to be aligned. We all do our work, separate boxes. How do you de-silo them and align them into the investor confidence? And I think the important part of this transition that we cannot leave is, as the fossil transition happens, there will be people left behind. Whether it's job loss, communities saddled with having to clean up the land, the environmental remediation. So I think for us to transition and create the confidence for Californians at writ large, we have to make sure that long-term transition planning is happening today and people feel like they actually own this transition.
Okay, I want you all to imagine it's 2045. We have hit our clean energy targets. Great job. I'm liking this engagement, high schoolers. I love high schoolers. I'm not trying to single you out too much. Okay, and we've hit our goals, right? And it's come at an affordable, it's been affordable, right? All the things that folks said they wanted in PPIC's report out today, they've all happened. What were the main reforms that made this possible? Nora, would you like to start us off?
Would I ever? I think one of the things that in my world, as we're sitting on a beach drinking a Mai Tai in 2045, this has all happened, that enabled it is, and I'm going to key off something that the PG&E representative in the prior panel said, more collaboration. And more collaboration, I think, in particular with industrial customers, the industrial customer class, because there are a lot of things that industrial customers can and want to do now to help improve reliability, help with decarbonization, because they have their own decarbonization goals themselves. And as they need more power to decarbonize, there are things that they can do behind the meter on their own properties. And one of them is industrial process waste heat recovery, which means they invest their own private capital in their manufacturing process, which generates heat as a byproduct of that heavy manufacturing. They capture that heat and use it to spin a turbine and create energy on their own site, and then they can use it on their own site to offset some of their grid usage. And a bill was passed last year, AB 2109, that would it would make it easier to spend that private capital here in California versus spending it, say, in Louisiana or in Texas or in another state, because it would exempt it from departing load charges. And that is something that the Public Utilities Commission now has on its plate to do the implementation for AB 2109, to do that industrial process heat recovery technology. I think that is something that would really help us get to 2045, because waste heat recovery is a known technology. It's zero carbon and it uses private capital, and that, in my in my mind, is a sort of a no-brainer thing that can really help get us there. Other things, the Energy Commission is investing in distributed energy resources with private companies. One of the CLECA members, Pacific Steel Group, has just gotten a great grant from the Energy Commission for long-duration storage.
Can you explain what that means, distributed energy resources?
Distributed energy resources are sort of the opposite of like the 550 megawatt power plant. It is smaller energy resources that are distributed throughout the system, usually on customer sites. It can be demand response, it can be energy efficiency, it can be distributed generation.
It could look like a battery in someone's home.
Yeah. Solar and storage, or I have one of the CLECA members has 3 turbines that y'all probably see anytime you drive by, 3 big wind turbines outside the Anheuser-Busch facility, right? That's a distributed energy resource. And this grant for Pacific Steel Group is long duration storage. And it is one of the nascent technologies that needs help. So I think more Energy Commission involvement in grants like that to industry where they want to spend their own money, but they have their own, capital requirements. They've got to make things pencil out, and that is really helpful. So those are 2 things.
I'm going to ask Adria for some solutions now too.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Just so we get to everyone before we open up for questions. All right, Adria, we're here in 2045. It's great. What happened?
It's great here in the future. So a few things happened. One, we did start thinking holistically as an ecosystem. Right now, TURN is pursuing something called the Campaign for Affordable Power, which is our effort to build a big tent. CLECA is part of that, and we're so thankful for that. AARP is part of that. We also have groups like EnviroVoters and Earth Justice and the Farm Bureau. And when you see folks like the Farm Bureau and Earth Justice on the same side, we know that we are dealing with something major. They're not always on the same side.
And what does it do, this?
So the Campaign for Affordable Power is pursuing a number of legislative efforts, and different groups support different aspects of these. So I will talk about some of the provisions that are currently in SB 254 and AB 825 by Becker and Cotty Petrie Norris, respectively. So the first, like I mentioned, is public transmission financing and public financing of customer energization. These are huge cost drivers, and so if we can find ways to take them out of rate base, remove the giant profit margin that comes from private shareholder funding.
And this refers to investor-owned utilities,
Investor-owned
right?
utilities,
Needing
correct.
to make a profit for their shareholders.
Correct.
Okay.
So when we use private loans to finance this infrastructure development, it costs significantly more. So in the future, we have adopted these public funding and alternative funding mechanisms that have driven down costs by then. We have also increased transparency. So right now we have opportunities to do that through AB 1020 and AB 1167 as well as SB 24. And what some of the things that those bills do is prepare for the public influx of public financing by creating a transparent system to track the public funding and ensure that the savings is passed on to ratepayers. It also prevents ratepayer money from being wasted on inappropriate spending like promotional ads we used to see during the Warriors games. We also have shifted the frame for what is just and reasonable. So some of our provisions are to, alongside the general rate case application, investor-owned utilities should put forward an inflation-constrained alternative scenario so that the commission has both things to consider and we can shift the conversation and the baseline for what is reasonable.
All right,
and then the last thing is that we focus on equitable development. I'll keep it quick.
Okay.
I absolutely hear Siva's comment about the potential for job loss and the negative effects on folks of some of our most vulnerable communities. And so we focus on equitable development, putting EV charging stations in predominantly Black communities, for example, where they don't currently exist.
Thank you. All right, President Reynolds, it's 2045. What happened?
Well, I mean, I think I appreciate Nora's comment about, collaboration. I think having honest conversations where we're really looking at what the cost drivers actually are and and what we're getting for our money. But continuing to do a lot of the things that we are doing in terms of the new build. Last year we had a record build of clean energy resources, highest ever in California, 7 gigawatts in 1 year. And so continuing at that pace with just lots of different clean energy projects throughout the system that can take us to our goals in 2045. And I also think, figuring out this, the private capital issue, so we bring in private capital, someone has to repay it. It's not a grant. And so how do we kind of think through how that can be done equitably? It's a really hard question. And so maybe, in 2045, we've gotten to the bottom of that a little bit more. Industrial ratepayers have clear needs and clear concerns about rates, and as well as residential low-income customers in particular. And so how do we, just have more of a better balance and way to distribute costs? I think continuing to have transparency throughout the system. So the investor-owned utilities actually are very transparent. We can data request them for anything. All parties can data request them. Some other parts of the electrical system don't have the same kind of transparency if they're
like what?
private entities. And so being careful about that private sector, which is good. It drives our economy. We need to continue to get investment, but any kind of non-regulated entity is harder to keep track of. It's harder for the public to know what's happening.
Okay. Chair Gunda, I want to offer you like 30 seconds to answer that question, because then we're going to start Q&A.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think I just wanted to agree with all the points that have been just made. I would say, California, it's my home. I feel proud of California. There are some incredible people in this room and all over California that I believe can get this work done. To me, just kind of taking it out of the system just a second, there are 3 ways to lead, and we need to lead. We don't have an option. You lead through fear, lead through vision, lead through values, right? No matter what you choose, if there are fears in California about this transition are real, we need to be able to create faith and trust that can happen. We need to be able to take our vision into what was discussed by Kate earlier on the panel. What is our roadmap? What does our implementation pathway look like? And on values, entropy is real. Entropy grows. It's very easy for things to break. It's harder to bring people together. I think I would agree values broadly in California are shared. So how do we make sure it's not or answers, but an and answer? How do we do equity, clean, reliable, and safe? How do you keep everybody together? And foundationally, I feel like in 2045, as I'm retiring from public service, and I look towards my kids and how joyful they are, I would love to feel like we've created trust in the system and in each other.
Thank you. All right, we'd like to hear from all of you. Let's turn to the audience Q&A portion. A reminder for those here in Sacramento, raise your hand and PPIC staff will come to you with a microphone. Do state your name and your organization before asking a question or your grade. And for those of you joining us virtually, please send an email to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. Be sure to also include your name and organization along with your question. PPIC staff are monitoring the questions as they come in. All right, we have a question over there.
Hello, Meredith Alexander with Gridwell Consulting. Great conversation. I heard recently from PG&E at a presentation to ratepayers that about 1/3 of our bills right now are going to vegetation management, which is obviously so critical for wildfire prevention. So this is a really low-tech question, but do we think there's a way we could do that more affordably? Could we potentially benchmark how much it costs public utilities to do that, or public entities? And is there a way we could think about involving some other state workforce in the off season? I don't know, CAL FIRE or Conservation Corps. I just found that number shocking. Multiple folks have verified it for me, so I just thought I would bring it up to this panel. Thank you.
That is a shocking number. Who wants to take that one?
Do you want me to take it?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's 1/3 of the bill on vegetation management. It might be for wildfire costs, including insurance and other costs, right? You probably know, Adria. Yeah. But it's a really good question. And one of the things that we would like to do is get more input into our GRC processes. And so Adra's right, like if we can use the GRC as the way that we evaluate the types of costs, what are the expenditures for, how are they being done, could they be done more cost effectively, are you using the right measures as part of the GRC process? And we have an agency in the state, the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety, that focuses on wildfire mitigation. And they review the plans that are done by PG&E and the other utilities to try to get the best risk reduction through the measures that they're implementing. But we don't have those processes aligned. And something actually the legislature is considering. And a change would allow us to take the input from OEIS in the wildfire mitigation plans and input it into our processes, so we have better information to inform the expenditures that the utilities are proposing to make. So I think there's a lot of potential there to get the cost down. The IOU-POU comparison is not easy because the IOU territories are so different compared to urban areas like SMUD and LADWP, our largest publicly owned utilities. The rest of the West, we do a lot of collaboration, the utilities commissions and the utilities themselves with the other Western utilities. Other Western states are starting to get much more concerned about wildfire risk and wildfire mitigation. They come to California to learn at this point, but we certainly want to learn from them as well.
Thank you. Yeah, Adria.
Yeah, I would just add the cost of vegetation management is expensive, absolutely. I think it gets brought up a lot as a way to justify undergrounding of power lines. And I think what we have to remember there is, one, undergrounding is significantly more expensive than vegetation management, and it doesn't eliminate the need for vegetation management. When we talk about undergrounding, we're really talking about distribution lines. We're not talking about transmission lines. So you would have the cost of undergrounding plus the cost of you still maintain the cost of vegetation management. And that's why we like to prefers to look at these cost-effective solutions where you get over 99% of the savings, but you can implement those projects like fast trip technology, covered conductors, insulated power lines in a third of the time and for half the cost. So I appreciate the question.
It does bring up that question of, what is a more cost-effective way? What innovation needs to happen for the tree trimming process to become significantly cheaper? Okay, question over here.
Thank you. Adam Stern with Offshore Wind California. Fascinating conversation, great expertise among all of you. What are your respective agencies and organizations doing to talk to the public about the drivers of energy costs so that they understand this, and starting with the electric bill that everyone receives and has difficulty reading through and connecting to some of these drivers that you've spoken about today?
President Reynolds, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think something that PUC has, we've been trying to improve on this. As an economic regulator, we do a lot of work with our experts through litigated proceedings where we have parties, and so the parties are very aware of what's going on, but the rest of the public is not necessarily aware. We have, good timing to start talking about kind of bill education. We are shifting to have a component of the bill be as a flat rate, so set on the bill as a flat rate rather than currently the bills are all volumetric. So you pay according to how much energy you use, even though some of the things you're paying for are fixed costs. So they don't vary, but your bill will vary according to what you use. And so we went through a process to pull some of those costs out into a flat rate in the bill. It brings us more in line with the publicly owned utilities and utilities throughout the country. And it also encourages electrification because it lowers rates. So then if you add a heat pump or an EV, you're not paying as much going forward into the future. So this change in the bill is happening this fall and for PG&E early next year. So there have been, there are materials that were produced. All the utilities are reaching out to all of their customers through email, through convenings, and to try to explain kind of what is your bill, what's in it, and what is this change that you're going to see. Obviously, I think there could be more. We have also tried to have PG&E in particular, because of its size, have a regional structure. So as you're implementing any program, anything that you do, Are you reaching out to the different regions? So serving the communities and communicating with the communities in a way that is easier to access for ordinary Californians. At the PUC, we also do a lot of it too. We have a public advisor's office. We try to go to local fairs, and we have informational materials about ways to save money on your bill, whether it's the CARE program or energy efficiency, different kinds of things that customers can do. So we're trying to do more. We're trying to do a lot, but I think there's always more we could do.
Yeah.
I will say one thing, and I want to give the CPC props on this. The investor-owned utilities have, over the past several years, been putting out these quarterly reports, which are, Excel workbooks that can be kind of dense. And they come out quarterly, show all the different revenue requirement changes and the requests the utilities have been making. And recently, the requirement has been put out that those quarterly reports include the customer class impacts, not just the residential customers, but also the industrial customers, the ag customers, small business customers. And I thought that was a phenomenal change, and that really helps with the transparency. So just want to give the Public Utilities Commission props for that too.
Adria?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, TURN works with directly with the public through our Ratepayers United effort, doing community organizing. And the other thing, and also props to the commission, TURN is a consumer advocacy organization. So we advocate at the PUC in, dozens of proceedings every year. And one of the things that we advocate for are public participation hearings, which the commission often has in person and online, and we organize folks to turn out and participate in those and prepare them. So we do a lot of community education on these issues as well. And then also in terms of educating the public, you all are the public. So attending conferences like this and being able to be in a room with a group of experts and those who are really looking to dive into these issues is a great opportunity.
All right, who's got another question? Over here.
Is it on? Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Sarah from Stanford University and the Environmental Defense Fund. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the regional market and what are some of the challenges with making that a reality, and do you have any solutions to those challenges?
Nora, did you want to take that one? Because you were talking about it earlier, or who'd like to? First, can someone define, what do you actually mean when you say a regional market?
So the regional market, think sort of west of the Mississippi. Right now, there are all these individual energy markets, right? California is largely one with the California Independent System Operator managing it, and then you have, there's like 17
40
Balancing areas.
balancing areas. Yeah, they're
38.
and you have to 38. So there's a lot. And so between all these different balancing areas, you might have a party A in balancing area 1 that wants to transact with party B in balancing area 2, and you have what's called a seams issue between them. There's friction that would make that transaction just a little bit harder, a little bit more expensive, not quite as seamless or easy if it were all, say, within the same market. So right now, there are 2 pushes to regional markets in the West. One is Southwest Power Pool Markets Plus that is gaining traction in some of the balancing areas. And then the other one is the California Independent System Operators Expanded Day-Ahead Market, or EDAM. And the bill that is pending right now is Becker's bill, SB 540. I'm not 100% sure what the status is. I know it's been amended. I know, people have different concerns with the amendments, but this is a really important thing, because if we can go from 38 different balancing areas to even just 2 big markets, that's going to make trading and optimization across those 2 big markets easier and better, less costly, more affordable. You don't have to build out as much And in the big picture, in the long run, as we're looking to 2045 and beyond, not having to build as much gets to be really important.
And just kind of to add to Nora, I think we as state agencies have been working on developing some analysis, and two points are real. So first, theoretically, when you do the analysis, there's opportunity for reduced GHG emissions because we're now sharing, we're not curtailing our resources, solar and wind in the middle of the day. It also comes with reduction in costs, almost as high as $1 billion a year. And because, to Nora's point, there is seamless exchange of energy across systems, you have the opportunity for higher reliability. The idea is, if you have a big footprint that's trading, in a market, not all of them will have the, extreme weather at the same time, right? So the idea is that, if the footprint of the market is larger than any one single climate event, we will all benefit from that. So that's the idea. And again, as we build anything, and we do anything, there's always risks. And one of the core premises for us as state agencies is ensuring consumer protection. And there's a number of steps that are included in the pathways to make sure that consumers are protected at the end of the day. And we de-risk those solutions.
Adria, would you like to close us out with one last thought?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to have to turn as a different position on the regionalization. So I just need to throw that out there as a counterbalance.
Yeah, appreciate it.
The regionalization proposals that have been floated over the last several years has not been something that TURN has supported. The proposal that is out currently is very different than what's been floated before and moves in a better direction. But we're very concerned about maintaining California's autonomy, particularly, frankly, in a Trump administration with a Trump-controlled FERC, which is the federal department. Thank you. The Federal Energy, somebody help me out. Regulatory Commission. And you use acronyms so often.
Yeah. They would have more control.
And they would have significantly more control over this. And so we want to have a couple of guarantees. One, that if this, if the regionalization were to move in a direction and folks were doing things that we don't agree with and are against California values, that we have a way to exit and return to the independent system operator as a backup. And the other thing is to have guarantees. Not all of these states have the same climate goals in mind that California does. And we want insurance that the energy we're bringing in from other states is not fossil fuel based. So that, we're encouraging the use of carbon fuels just because they're over state lines.
Thank you. All right, I want to thank this incredible panel. We have reached the end of our session here, and I want to thank Siva Gunda, Alice Reynolds, Nora Sheriff, and Adria Tinnin for participating in this discussion. We will now take a short break and return at 1:15 for today's final conversation on California's energy economy. Let's give them a round of applause.
I'll give myself.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. And please be back at 1:15 for the conversation moderated by PPIC's President and CEO, Tani Cantil Sakaue. Thank you. Great job staying awake.